thank you on the panel for this really authentic discussion, and of course Preston for bringing us all together. I'm hearing two themes, and Chantal, you said we need to have intelligent policies that respond to people's needs, and I'm certainly drawn to that. But I'm John West, and I was the MP for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country for 2 terms, and contested unsuccessfully in the last election. At 1,000 doors, I never heard somebody say our platforms were inadequate or deficient. Instead, I heard more of the theme that you also brought out and others, not what we're doing, but who we are. And the reason I joined the Conservative Party is because I thought it shared the values that I cared most about: freedom, responsibility, equality, compassion, integrity. And I love to think and be those things. And I didn't hear people saying we stood for that. And so my question is this: where do you see the emphasis? What we do in terms of our platforms, which is important, or who we are and who we are perceived to be, and the values that we stand for?
But they come hand in hand, right? I'll bring you to the kneecap debate. Why did Justin Trudeau win the kneecap debate on an issue that he should have lost in the polls? Because his stance on the kneecap debate, which is a policy stance, goes to who the Liberals are. You could set your clock on Justin Trudeau saying what he said about the kneecap, because that's who they are. You can like it or not like it, but you do know that. I look at your party and the kneecap, and I don't know who you think you are. If you do, you can explain it to me. But when people look at you and say it's who you are or who you are not, they may not be rhyming off policy positions, but in their minds, there are issues that brand a party beyond tone. And before you set out, you need to decide for yourselves who you are. I have to say that having covered with great interest the Reform Party, the Canadian Alliance, the Brian Mulroney government, I don't really know who you are anymore, except, it seems, to go to the point from the young person, a party that seems to believe that it's the party of a status quo. And I don't think that's where you come from.
Okay, I'm very conscious of this countdown clock here, and I'm afraid of what's going to happen when it goes to the red. So we've got about 6 minutes left, and I'd like to get through the questions from the floor. So I'll ask you to be quick with the questions, and panel, if you could be quick with the answers too.
Certainly. So my name's Tim Barnes. I'm a student at Mount Royal University in Computer Information Systems. First off, thank everyone for coming out here today. It's a great conversation and one we need to have. Also, I wanted to thank you for your broad support for the Rebel in their controversy with Rachel Notley over in Alberta. My question is, looking at U.S. campuses, the controversies with Ben Shapiro and Milo Yiannopoulos, people trying to shut down intelligent discussion and legitimate debate. As journalists, the right to free speech and the right to the freedom of the press are cornerstones of any democracy. Can you speak to the importance and perhaps comment a little bit on this movement to try and shut down these commentators?
You need to say something, especially about free speech.
This is true.
It's just some advice from the communications guy.
I'm aware of the instances you bring up, and obviously, you know, what's hate speech? It's speech we hate. So then you, of course, want to shut down anyone who doesn't have the view that you have, and it's unfortunate, and it shouldn't be happening. One thing, though, that I think has been bad for society in the past 10 years, and I apologize, this isn't to exactly answer your question, but sort of both the blogosphere and campus shenanigans have played a greater part in influencing how average people view the news, because it's this disproportionate vocal minority, and it's easy to write those stories, get them out there, and they get a disproportionate amount of social media traction. That you know, the whole question of, you know, should this guy who's running these I'm talking about this Roosh V guy who does I'm trying to think of what it's called, it is sort of misogynist, pseudo-misogynist event. You know, we just shouldn't all be talking about this as a country. It's a really sort of fringe little thing, but battle lines are drawn by that, and then you're defined by do you agree with the extreme left, or do you agree with sort of this extreme other version? And it's not particularly healthy. So obviously these folks should not be censored at all, and they're actually saying relatively benign stuff, but people just can't handle anyone who doesn't completely agree with them. But I just think it's a shame that campus rhetoric has become national rhetoric.
Good. Question over here.
Yes, hello. I'm a Green conservative, and I take very well the suggestions that we have had here about owning up to the fact that we are conservatives and that and really being proud of our values. The one question I have though is for the conservative movement to recharge. Do we also not need to distance ourselves in certain areas, specifically issues such as climate, which aren't going to go away?
Oh no, I think this is your
Rock, paper, scissors, go.
I missed the last part of your question. I think I got it, but I'm not sure. So can you just repeat it so I don't?
For the movement to recharge, do we, in some areas, need to distance ourselves from our past policies and attitudes?
My answer to that would be, of course. And actually, you've used up a decade distancing yourself from an issue that is not going to go away, to the point that when you introduced yourself as a Green conservative, there should not be Green conservatives because the conservatives should be Green. And until that happens, and you speak to a minority called Green conservatives, I think that this party will have a problem.
Question.
My name is Lynn Golding, and I'm the wife of an MP. I knocked on hundreds of doors during this campaign. At the beginning of the campaign, the reaction about our leader, the Prime Minister, was that he was somebody that a lot of people didn't want to have a beer with, but they thought he was very competent and was the best person to lead the economy. By the end of the campaign, really by the middle of the campaign, nobody was talking about anything like that. They were just saying, love your husband, can't stand his leader. That's what we heard at door after door. So I'm wondering whether you wrote articles like that. This turned on a dime, in my opinion, with rank and file voters who aren't aligned with the party. It really turned on a dime. And it was before the niqab issue. The niqab issue was the nail in the coffin. So I'm just wondering if you detected that, if you wrote on that, and what you think caused that change in about mid-September.
There was not a poll for 2 years that didn't show 66% of Canadians committed to voting for someone else. So there was not a great love affair out there for Stephen Harper. I think what happened mid-September is that Canadians decided that Justin Trudeau was acceptable. But I look at the polls. It's 2 years of polls where people say, isn't it great how sturdy the Conservative base is, rather than, isn't it bad that they never rise over and above that base. So there was not a solid foundation for re-election. It rested on a good split between the NDP and the Liberals. Didn't happen. And it rested on Justin Trudeau not being up for the job. Those are two conditions outside of your control. But they are not great conditions to go in a campaign with.
I've spoken to quite senior people, very loyal to Stephen Harper in the Conservative campaign, who say they were hearing what you started to hear as early as the beginning of 2015. Whether they were committed Conservative, committed not Conservative, or undecided, the question that they would hear at the door in by-election campaigns and things like that was, so when are you going to change the leader, By the end of it, and by the end of it means the entire duration of the campaign, the Harper Conservative campaign had sunk well into self-parody. To the extent that I do these insidery, super unnamed sources pieces after the election about how it all went down, I would, again, talk to people who had senior supervisory positions in the Conservative campaign who did not know much at all about what had happened in the office on this side and the office on that side in the campaign. It's great if you have a secrecy policy that means no one's supposed to talk to me. But first of all, that doesn't work. They do talk to me. Secondly, apparently they didn't talk to each other, and they lost bad. Don't do that.
Okay, so we have limited time, and I see two people. So maybe what I'll do is get you to ask your question quickly. I'll get you to ask your question quickly, and then we'll mash together an answer.
Okay, prior to the election, we had several high-profile Conservatives retire from the party to private business. How hurtful was that to the party?
Okay, and a question there.
Yes, sorry. So sneaky conservatism was mentioned here, and how conservatives sometimes try to find workaround ways of doing something instead of arguing their point. So how can this be not only the right thing to do, but also a winning strategy? So how does one argue the message that is unpopular? Because sometimes journalists just wait for the right moment, and they like to cover what's popular. So I think it's also tempting for politicians to focus on what sells best. So how can arguing your point be a winning strategy?
I think conviction politicians, whether they're Barack Obama or Rob Ford, win because people smell their conviction.
I think doing what's right is self-explanatory, and if it's not, then it's not what's right.
I like the question over here, and I've forgotten. What was it?
It was about, well, it was about sneaky conservatives as well, but those high-profile cabinet ministers and politicians leaving.
Yeah, James and Peter and the gang, John Baird. I heard several months before he left that he was going to leave. It seriously sapped the momentum out of the movement, but you can't blame people for making their individual decisions. And somebody in their late 40s, mid 40s will stay in politics if politics looks good, you know.
What you can blame a campaign trust for is knowing all this, not to go out of its way to rebuild a fresher team. And Jean Chrétien, for all of his bragging about himself, went into the 2000 election having made sure that he had new solid faces around him, that he wasn't just selling himself as, I'm here, what do you care if everybody else is left? And you know, the evidence would suggest that the longer you're around, the more you need to show your capacity to renew, and the less you should count on just being the leader. And this Conservative campaign went the other way. It also put in the front window of the government for months on end people that I would argue were more likely to score cheap points in question period than to impress Canadians with the worthiness of the Conservative team. And to make matters worse, it's not as if those people did not exist. They were just not put forward.
So I was told, you know, when we were getting down to the countdown to go stand here, that was going to be a sign. So on your behalf, I'd just like to thank our panelists this morning. The journalist panel is always, I think, one of the highlights of the Manning Conference. So if we could have a round of applause for our journalists. And so I've got a few housekeeping things. It is apparently a time for some coffee, sponsored by Summa Strategies, which is really a fine company, employs really great people, and you should go and enjoy our free coffee, because that's the only free thing that you'll ever really get from us. After the break in this room, you're not going to want to miss Conservatives on Cannabis. Now it says after here, Jim, insert joke here. But I don't really think I need to insert the joke. I'm just going to leave that for you to insert your own joke. In room 205, there's digital tools for politics with Facebook and the state of the conservative movement in room 206. And we're going to start back promptly at 11:15. So thanks very much, everybody.